Ryan Buckner, Chief Knowledge Officer here at Showman, and I've got a great friend and colleague, Doug Caney, here, and I wanted to pull him aside, just ask him a few questions related to the truth behind high trust assessments. So Doug, thanks so much for taking a few minutes
Absolutely.
out. Just got a few questions for you. You know, some of them might be a little tough for you. We'll see. All right.
All right.
So high trust. We're talking about high trust assessments. You know, you've got assessments, you've got certifications. I won't pretend to be the expert, which is why I brought you here.
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about how they go well. If you can give me like the number one greatest success factor or strategy for a successful high trust assessment, what would it be?
I would say management commitment. The ones that we see fail are just, there's not enough time allocated to it, the resources to, whether it's pull the evidence or remediate anything that's identified.
That's right.
And if you don't have the management support to spend the time to do that,
That's right.
they just end up dragging on, and then they eventually, you end up having to either add more time or they get a non-certified or validated report.
That's right.
I would say that by far is the number one factor.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that because executive sponsorship matters so much for just about everything. And oftentimes I've often scratched my head and said, well, they're paying us to do an audit. Why aren't they collaborating and participating in the way that I would pay, any professional service? I couldn't imagine going to an attorney and saying, hey, I need a will and trust drawn up, but I'm not going to spend any time with you. I'm not going to give you the information that you need, right? It's executive sponsorship, absolutely. And I imagine that works not just for high trust, but just about any assessment.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, I think high trust, it really sticks out just because of I think also what ties into it is sometimes people underestimate that level of effort that goes into it. Any assessments we do.
Can you tell right away if the client has that executive sponsorship or not? What do you look for?
Yeah, I would say usually within the first week of field work, you can tell. If when we ask follow-ups and it's followed by, well, hey, I'll get to that next week or in 2 weeks versus we're in field work and we're doing the audit.
That's right.
And you can tell then that it's going to potentially be one of those that goes that
That's
way.
right.
Yeah.
That's a fingers crossed moment, right?
Yeah.
All right. So sort of a corollary to that, biggest misunderstanding about high trust assessments. What's the thing that when you're performing the assessment, you say, wow, I can't believe that you thought that.
Yeah.
Right.
I think a lot of it, especially for organizations that have done other compliance assessments, is that it's just like another one of those. Like it's another, here's some additional requirements that I'm going to just have someone come in and audit me against them. High trust, it's very unique, but it also pulls the policy and procedure side, which I would say that's the biggest thing for most of our clients that have done other assessments.
That's right.
Is meeting those policy and procedure requirements of high trust. And a lot of them say, well, yeah, we got SOC 2, we got good policies. You probably do, but not from the high trust point of view.
Right.
They are very prescriptive in what they expect to see. Their requirements are very prescriptive. So it isn't because we got SOC 2, we'll just be able to turn around do high trust.
It's not just about a particular control or safeguard. Is how well is it documented? How mature is your control environment? Do you have the sort of the policy to support that?
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. So it's almost like there's a high trust lens that you have to look through when you look at policies. And just because you've got policies for ISO 27001 or for SOC 2, it's a good start.
You're going to need to make. You have a good baseline.
That's right.
And I always tell a lot of the organizations, even if they have SOC 2. High trust has very prescriptive requirements. You might have, you define the controls in the SOC 2, whereas high trust, it's similar to, say, PCI, where it's very prescriptive. You have to have this. So just because you have the SOC 2, depending on what implementation requirements you get in your high trust certification, it's not going to be a direct, well, we'll just carry it over and we're good to go.
Implementation requirements, that sounds scary. Maybe we'll get to that later. All right. Okay. Now this one, you might need something stronger than water for this one. All right. Now, Doug, nobody's perfect. Even the assessors get it wrong from time to time. Where do we get it wrong? Where do assessors out there get it wrong?
Yeah, I would say maybe even recommending or proposing a timeline that's a little too aggressive.
What do you mean?
So a lot of times you'll have an organization come to you and say, hey, we want to be high trust certified in 6 months because of this contract.
What's wrong with that?
Yeah, sounds great. But, high trust, you really have to break it out into 2 phases, looking at the policies and procedures first, because I've yet to have a client, unless they've used some third-party consultant that essentially built the HITRUST policies and procedures for them.
That's right.
So you have that first phase, which is kind of like a higher level review of the policies, procedures, but also focusing on the domains that maybe only have a few requirements. So with HITRUST,
I see.
you have to meet a 3 or higher in all 19 domains.
Got it.
But there's some domains that might only have 3 requirements, and there's some domains that might have 70.
Got it.
So your margin for error in that one with 3 requirements is like 0.
That's right.
Versus the one that has 70.
That's right.
So you have to be strategic about it, because it's not a one, like, you don't have to meet every requirement.
That's
right. It's not like PCI. You can have gaps. You can still get certified with gaps. You just have to meet that average score of a 3.
How do you thread that needle, though? Because if a client or a prospective client says, hey, I've got a legitimate need to be certified in 6 months,
Yep.
right? And so you want to help them,
Yep.
right? But at the same time, you don't want to set them up for failure. So how do you strike that right balance?
Yeah.
How do you know?
It's tough. I mean, because you do have that, and I think a lot of it is, if they have done all the upfront consulting, that it seems like maybe they have a HITRUST expert on their team, they have a lot of management commitment.
Yeah.
That's a different story, but that's an exception to the norm.
Got
I feel
it.
like in most cases,
Got it.
and promising that. Trying to push it in, the problem you get there is you have to do all testing within 90 days of HITRUST.
I see.
So
Okay.
if we started that path and we found out, oh yeah, there's a domain you're not meeting,
That's right.
not only does all testing have to get done within 90 days, if you implement something based on what we found being missing,
That's right.
you have to let that be in place for 90 days.
Got it.
So
Got
what
it.
happens if you find that out at the very end?
That's right.
Well, now you did 80% of the assessment already,
That's right.
but now you got to let 90 days lapse. But what's that mean for
Wow.
that 80%? Now you have to redo that.
That's right.
So it sets the client up for failure if you try to exceed that timeline. But it is tough when you have them saying, hey, I need to do this within 60 days.
I got to imagine, though, coming to them 75 days in and say, hey, we need to do something different is a much tougher conversation to have than to say, hey, you can get certified in 9 months instead.
Exactly.
So just being honest and upfront, and I guess all part of the planning, right?
Yeah,
Just making sure
it
you have a
is.
good, clear understanding of the scope, put together the right plan, and execute accordingly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It sounds so simple.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna let you go after this one, but people are gonna ask, right? And this is the truth series here. So, how much do these assessments cost? I mean, how much do they really cost?
Yeah. So there's always going to be the cost with HITRUST, which they control that. We have no input on that, and that is you have to buy access to my CSF portal, and you have to purchase your object or your report credit.
Oh, I see. So if you're a prospective organization looking to undergo HITRUST assessments, there's really sort of at least another aspect to the cost structure that is separate and apart from us, consultants, et cetera.
Yep, exactly, and that's you can't do HITRUST without doing that part.
Got it. Got it.
And so there's that part, and that's going to vary. They change their pricing, so I can't really speak to that.
That's right.
But from our perspective, an assessment on the low end, and it's a 2-year certification cycle. So the first year on the low end would probably be somewhere in the 65-ish K range.
Got it.
And on the high end, we have some that go up to 175K.
Got it.
And it's just the thing that makes it that's a huge range, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
and the way that HITRUST works, though, is you enter your assessment factor. There's all these questions you answer, things like number of records held, number of interfaces to other systems, these things that the tool, MyCSF, will then build a risk profile for you, and it'll come back and say, okay, based on what you put, you have to meet 250 implementation requirements. Whereas if I answer that number of records held question on the high end and all these other questions that make me more risky,
got it.
maybe I have 700.
That's right.
So it varies greatly, but I would say the biggest thing for organizations to keep in mind is work with an assessor to make sure you're answering those questions right.
That's right.
Because I've seen so many companies that have just a hugely inflated HITRUST scope.
That's right.
And for no reason. You don't get 2 gold stars.
That's right.
Like by having 700 versus 250. So that'd be for the validated assessment. Then the interim assessment. So it's a 2-year cycle.
Okay.
There's not as much involved that second year. I would say cost of that's usually somewhere in the 25 to 40K range.
Got it.
And that really depends on the size, number of applications in scope, all the other things that come in. Another factor is if you had a lot of corrective action plans.
That's right.
Coming out of your first certification.
That's right.
We have to look at those in the interim assessment.
Okay.
So you might have gotten certified, but you got 40 corrective action plans.
That's right.
That means that we have to look at 40. We have to
right.
retest those in that interim assessment, plus the 19 that HITRUST randomly picks.
Yeah. Now you didn't say it, so I won't say it either. But it sounds as though that it kind of depends, right?
It does. It's. I would say probably more so than all the other assessment types that I do.
Yeah.
You can have such huge swings.
That's right.
And again, I think it's also the one that people make way harder than it needs to be.
That's right. You really got to nail down that scope.
Yeah.
And then you have to have the understanding, like you were saying, with the corrective action plan on how year one could impact the scoping for year two. And the greater the level of effort, the greater the fees associated, greater complexity potentially.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Man.
Yep.
So I guess this audit stuff just isn't a commodity at all. You really have to understand what's involved.
Well,
right?
and the thing with HITRUST that is different than a lot of our other services too is every certification gets QA'd by HITRUST.
I see.
So if you have an assessor that's coming in and saying it should cost $20K,
right?
If they don't perform that assessment to the standards that HITRUST requires,
oh, I see.
There's times where we've had many organizations come to us and say we thought we were getting certified. Our external assessor said we were. Went to HITRUST, they did their QA, said no, you didn't do the proper testing. We're lowering the scoring, and you're not getting certified.
Wow.
You don't have that with a lot of other types of assessments we have because HITRUST is who actually issues the certification.
That's right.
So the pricing. It definitely, you have to take into account the firm and their reputation with HITRUST as well.
How long has HITRUST been around?
It started in 2009.
Yeah.
They really picked up steam in 2015. That's when like the UHCs, the Anthems, they all kind of came together and said, hey, you want to be a business associate of ours? You need to be HITRUST certified.
Got it.
And that's when we as Shellman got into doing HITRUST because the demand was there and it complemented everything else that we do. I mean, HITRUST is built on the standards and frameworks that we already assessed against. So
how long have you been doing it?
Since 2015.
Yep. So right from the beginning.
Yeah, we were in the first class of the training. Yep.
Gotcha. So I imagine you've had an opportunity to see the good, the bad, and the exciting.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it so much, Doug. Thanks for answering these questions for you.
All right. Thanks, Buck.
This is the Truth Series, folks. We're going to bring in subject matter experts and ask them questions related to planning, scoping, what works well, what doesn't work so well. And maybe we'll add in a question or two about the price. So really appreciate it. Doug, thanks again for joining us today. And maybe we'll talk HITRUST and HIPAA combined in a future session.